The summer sun hangs low over the plains of southeastern Italy, casting long amber shadows across fields that have known human footsteps for thousands of years. The air is thick with heat, the kind that settles over the land in late July and refuses to move, clinging to the earth like a memory. This is Apulia, a region of gentle hills and flat expanses where the Alpidus River winds its slow, deliberate path through sun-baked terrain. The grasses here are golden now, brittle beneath the relentless Mediterranean sun, and the olive trees stand in silent groves, their silver-green leaves rustling softly in whatever breeze dares to stir. It is the year 216 BC, though the people who walk these lands do not mark time as we do. For them, this is simply summer, another season in an ancient rhythm of planting and harvest, of festivals and trade, of life continuing as it always has beneath the wide Italian sky. But something else is stirring in this summer air, something that cannot be seen but can be felt, Sorwin, the tension that has slowly crept across the peninsula. For 3 years now, the shadow of war has moved through these lands like a storm that refuses to break, hovering always on the horizon, darkening the edges of every peaceful moment. The people of Apulia have heard the stories, whispered in marketplaces and carried along trade routes, stories of a foreign general, a Carthaginian commander who crossed the Alps with elephants, who defeated Roman legions in battles that left the northern rivers running red. His name is spoken with a mixture of fear and disbelief, Hannibal Barca, and he is coming south. The landscape here seems untouched by such concerns, at least for now. Farmers still tend their fields, shepherds still guide their flocks across hillsides dotted with wildflowers, and the small towns and villages maintain their rhythms of daily life. The river Alpidus continues its ancient journey, indifferent to human conflict, its waters reflecting the cloudless sky above. But beneath this veneer of normalcy, there is an awareness, a collective holding of breath. Scouts have been seen on distant ridges. Dust clouds have been spotted on the horizon, the kind raised by many thousands of feet marching in unison. The roads that connect Rome to its southern territories have become arteries of military movement, with supply wagons and auxiliary troops flowing southward in unprecedented numbers. In Rome itself, hundreds of miles to the northwest, the Senate convenes in chambers that echo with heated debate. The marble halls of power are filled with the voices of men who have never known defeat, men whose ancestors conquered Italy tribe by tribe, city by city, extending the reach of Roman authority until it encompassed the entire peninsula. But now, for the first time in generations, Rome faces an existential threat within its own borders. Hannibal has done what no enemy has done before. He has brought war to Italy itself, striking at the heart of Roman power, challenging the very notion of Roman invincibility. The political climate in Rome is one of mounting desperation masked by institutional confidence. 2 consuls have been elected to lead Rome's military response, Gaius Terentius Varro and Lucius Aemilius Paullus. They are men of different temperaments, representing competing philosophies about how to confront this unprecedented crisis. Varro is the populist, the aggressive commander who believes that Rome's traditional strength, the disciplined fury of its legions, must be brought to bear against Hannibal in a single, decisive confrontation. He speaks in the Senate with fiery conviction, arguing that Rome cannot afford to wait, cannot allow this foreign invader to continue his destructive march through Italian territory. Every day that Hannibal remains on Italian soil is a day that Rome's authority diminishes, a day that Rome's allies question whether their allegiance is wisely placed. Paullus, by contrast, is more cautious, more measured in his approach. He has studied the previous battles, Trebia, where Hannibal lured the Romans into fighting in freezing winter conditions and destroyed their army, Lake Trasimene, where he ambushed an entire Roman force in the morning fog, driving them into the lake where they drowned by the thousands. Paullus understands that Hannibal is not merely a talented general but a master of psychological warfare, a commander who manipulates his enemies into fighting on ground and terms of his choosing. Paullus advocates for patience, for strategic caution, for wearing down the Carthaginian army through attrition, rather than risking everything in a single engagement. But Rome, in its wounded pride and mounting anxiety, sides with Varro's aggressive approach. The decision is made to assemble the largest army Rome has ever fielded, a force so massive that it will overwhelm Hannibal through sheer numerical superiority. The mobilization begins immediately, drawing upon every available resource across the Roman territories, Legions are recalled from garrison duty, new recruits are trained with urgent speed, and allied contingents are called upon to fulfill their treaty obligations. The result is an army of approximately 86,000 men, a staggering concentration of military power, the combined might of Rome and its allied cities, all focused on a single objective, the destruction of Hannibal Barca and his army. As this massive force begins its southward march, the Italian countryside transforms into a corridor of military movement. The famous Roman roads, those engineering marvels that connect the far reaches of the Republic, become rivers of armed men flowing toward Apulia. The logistics of moving such an army are immense. Each soldier must be fed, equipped, and supplied with water in the summer heat. Supply trains stretch for miles, laden with grain, weapons, tents, and all the material necessities of warfare. The ground trembles beneath thousands of hobnailed sandals while striking the stone roads in rhythmic cadence. Dust rises in massive clouds visible for miles, announcing the army's approach to every settlement along the route. Within this great host there is a mixture of emotions. Among the veterans, those who have fought in previous campaigns, there is grim determination but also an undercurrent of unease. They have heard the stories of Hannibal's tactical genius, and some have survived the earlier battles, carrying memories of chaos and slaughter that haunt their dreams. For the younger recruits, many experiencing military service for the first time, there is nervous excitement, the intoxicating blend of fear and anticipation that comes before first combat. They have been trained in the Roman method, drilled in the formations and the maneuvers that have made Rome's legions the dominant military force in the Mediterranean world. They believe in the system, in the discipline, in the overwhelming advantage of numbers. Surely, they tell themselves as they march southward through the summer heat, surely 86,000 men cannot be defeated by Hannibal's smaller force. But while Rome marches with its massive army, Hannibal has been waiting, watching, preparing. His own journey to this moment has been extraordinary, a testament to both his military brilliance and his sheer force of will. Years earlier he had departed from Carthaginian Spain with a diverse army, Iberians, Gauls, Numidians, Libyans, and a contingent of war elephants, and led them on an audacious march across the Pyrenees, through southern Gaul and over the Alps in late autumn. The crossing of the Alps remains one of the most remarkable military achievements in history, a campaign of such difficulty that it seems almost mythical in retrospect. The high mountain passes were already choked with early snow when Hannibal's army entered them, and the conditions were brutal beyond measure. Men and animals struggled through narrow defiles where a single misstep meant a fatal plunge into unseen chasms. Avalanches buried entire units without warning. The cold was so intense that soldiers lost fingers and toes to frostbite, and the elephants, those symbols of Carthaginian military power, suffered so terribly in the alien environment, many dying in the frozen heights. Yet Hannibal pressed on, driven by a hatred of Rome that had been instilled in him since childhood. His praecohor, Hannibal Barca, had made young Hannibal swear an oath of eternal enmity toward Rome, a vow that would shape the course of his entire life. When Hannibal finally descended from the Alps into the Po River valley of northern Italy, he had lost nearly half his army to the crossing, but what remained was hardened beyond ordinary measure. These were men who had survived what seemed impossible, who had followed their commander through conditions that would have broken lesser forces. They possessed an unshakable faith in Hannibal's leadership, a bond forged in shared suffering and sustained by his tactical genius in the battles that followed. At Trebia, Hannibal demonstrated his understanding of Roman psychology and his ability to manipulate the battlefield to his advantage. He positioned his army across the partially frozen river and then provoked the Romans into an impetuous attack on a cold December morning. The Roman soldiers, forced to wade through icy water before engaging in combat, were already compromised when they reached the Carthaginian lines. Hannibal had hidden cavalry units in the tall grass along the riverbanks, and when the Romans committed fully to their frontal assault, these concealed forces struck from the flanks, turning the battle into a rout. Thousands of Romans died in the freezing water or were cut down as they tried to retreat back across the river. At Lake Trasimene, Hannibal's tactical creativity reached even greater heights. He positioned his army along the forested hills overlooking the lake, concealed in the morning fog that commonly shrouds the area. When the Roman army, pursuing Hannibal with overconfident haste, marched along the narrow trail between the hills and the water, they walked directly into Hannibal's trap. The Carthaginian forces descended from the heights in a coordinated assault catching the Romans in a position where they could neither maneuver nor retreat effectively. The battle was less a fight than a massacre, with thousands of Romans pushed into the lake where they drowned under the weight of their armour, or cut down as they fled in panic along the shore. The consul leading that army, Gaius Flaminius, died in the fighting, and his entire force was effectively annihilated. These victories established Hannibal's reputation as a commander of extraordinary ability, but they also created a complex psychological situation. Rome, rather than suing for peace or acknowledging the magnitude of the threat, instead became more determined to destroy him. The defeats inflamed Roman pride, transforming the conflict from a territorial dispute into a matter of existential survival and national honour. And so Rome mobilized with unprecedented scale, assembling the army that now marches toward Apulia, toward the small town of Cannae, toward a confrontation that will become one of the most studied battles in all of military history. Hannibal's army, meanwhile, has been moving through southern Italy, living off the land, seeking to encourage Rome's allies to defect, and carefully choosing the ground where the next confrontation will occur. His force numbers approximately 50,000 men, less than Rome's massive army, but it is a more experienced and cohesive fighting force. The Numidian cavalry in particular represents a significant advantage. These North African horsemen are among the finest light cavalry in the ancient world, capable of rapid maneuvers and devastating charges. Hannibal's African infantry, veterans of multiple campaigns, are well-trained and battle-hardened. The Iberian and Gallic contingents bring their own fierce warrior traditions to the army. It is a multicultural force, held together by loyalty to Hannibal himself and by the shared experience of campaigning far from home in hostile territory. As both armies converge on the plains near Cannae, the stage is set for a confrontation of immense historical significance. The landscape itself becomes a character in this unfolding drama. The town of Cannae sits on elevated ground overlooking the Aufidus River, controlling access to the surrounding agricultural lands. The plains nearby are broad and relatively flat, the kind of terrain that seems ideal for large-scale infantry combat. For the Romans, who rely on the weight and discipline of their legion formations, such ground appears advantageous. Their tactical doctrine emphasizes the frontal assault, the steady pressure of ranks of heavy infantry pushing forward in coordinated waves, wearing down the enemy through sustained combat. With 86,000 men, the Romans believe they can simply overwhelm Hannibal's smaller force through attrition, if nothing else. But Hannibal sees the same terrain differently. He understands that the Romans will be confident, even overconfident, in their numerical superiority. He knows that Roman doctrine favours the direct approach, the application of maximum force at the centre of the enemy line. And he has conceived a plan of remarkable sophistication, one that will turn Rome's strengths into fatal vulnerabilities. As his army takes position on the plains near Cannae, Hannibal arranges his forces in an unusual formation, a crescent shape, with his weaker Gallic and Iberian infantry positioned at the centre, forming a bulge that extends toward the Roman lines. His stronger African infantry are held back on the flanks, positioned at angles to the centre. The cavalry, the Numidians on one wing, and the heavier Iberian and Gallic cavalry on the other, are positioned at the far edges of the formation. The night before battle, the two armies camp within sight of each other. Thousands of campfires dot the landscape as darkness falls, creating a constellation of flickering lights across the plain. In the Roman camp, the atmosphere is one of tense anticipation. Soldiers check their equipment, sharpen their ghetti, adjust their armour. Centurions move among the ranks, offering words of encouragement, reminding the men of their training, of Roman discipline, of the glory that awaits victors. Consul Varro, who holds command on this day due to the rotation system agreed upon with Paullus, is confident of victory. The plan is straightforward: advance in overwhelming force, engage the Carthaginian centre, and crush it through sheer numerical superiority. In the Carthaginian camp, the mood is different, more focused, more controlled. Hannibal moves among his troops, speaking to the different contingents in their own languages, reminding them of what they have survived together, of the victories they have won. He explains the plan to his officers in careful detail, ensuring that each commander understands his role in the complex choreography that will unfold tomorrow. The African infantry must hold discipline when the centre retreats, must wait for the precise moment to pivot inward. The cavalry must drive off their Roman counterparts quickly, then wheel around to attack the Roman rear. Everything must happen with precise timing or the trap will fail. Dawn breaks over the Aufidus on August 2nd, 216 BC, the sun rises in a sky that is already beginning to heat, promising another day of oppressive summer temperatures. The river catches the early light, its surface glittering as it flows past the plain, where two massive armies now begin their final preparations. The dust has not yet been stirred, and for a brief moment, the landscape retains a quality of pristine stillness, as if nature itself is holding its breath before the storm of violence that is about to be unleashed. The Roman army begins its deployment, a process that takes considerable time given the massive size of the force. The legions form up in their traditional triplex aces formation, 3 lines of heavy infantry arranged in a checkerboard pattern that allows for rotation of tired units and provides depth to the formation. But Varro has made a crucial modification to the standard deployment. Recognizing that Hannibal's army is smaller, he has decided to compress the depth of the Roman formation while extending its width, creating a massive wall of shields and swords that will strike the Carthaginian line with overwhelming force across a broad front. The theory is sound: maximize the number of men engaged simultaneously, prevent Hannibal from concentrating his forces against any particular point. In practice, however, this deployment creates a formation that is wider but less flexible, more difficult to maneuver, more vulnerable to losing cohesion if the flanks are threatened. The Roman cavalry, never Rome's strongest arm, are positioned on the wings. They are outnumbered and outclassed by the Carthaginian and Numidian horsemen they will face, but Varro expects the battle to be decided by the infantry clash in the centre. The cavalry's role, in his conception, is simply to prevent Hannibal's horsemen from interfering with the main engagement. It is a defensive assignment, and the Roman cavalry officers understand that they are not expected to win their duels, merely to hold their positions long enough for the infantry to achieve victory. Across the dusty plain, Hannibal's crescent formation waits. From the Roman perspective, it must appear almost inviting, as if the Carthaginians are already partially surrounded, their centre bulging forward vulnerable to the crushing weight of the Roman advance. But Hannibal has chosen this formation deliberately, understanding the psychology of his opponents. The Romans will see that bulging centre as a weakness to exploit a point where their superior numbers can be brought to bear most effectively. They will focus their assault there, pouring more and more men into what appears to be a winning fight, and in doing so, they will walk directly into the most perfectly executed tactical trap in military history. The battle begins not with the clash of infantry, but with skirmishers. Light troops armed with javelins and slings who advance ahead of the main lines, harassing the enemy, testing the opposing formations. These preliminary exchanges are brief and inconclusive, a ritual prelude to the main event. Then, almost simultaneously, both armies begin their advance. The Roman infantry moves forward in disciplined ranks, shields locked, maintaining the formation that has served Rome so well in countless previous battles. The sound of 86,000 men moving in coordinated lockstep is like thunder rolling across the plain, a deep rhythmic rumble punctuated by the metallic rattle of equipment and the shouted commands of officers maintaining unit cohesion. The Carthaginian centre, the Gauls and Iberians forming that forward bulge, moves to meet them, but their advance is less measured, more aggressive. These warriors, many fighting in their traditional styles rather than in rigid formation, surge forward with fierce enthusiasm, crashing into the Roman lines with violent impact. The initial collision is brutal, the kind of close-quarters combat where men push shield against shield, thrusting with short swords at any exposed flesh, grunting with effort, slipping in blood that quickly begins to pool on the dusty ground. For the Roman soldiers in the front ranks, this is what they have been trained for, the grinding attrition of sustained infantry combat, the test of endurance and discipline that separates professional soldiers from lesser warriors. At first, the battle seems to be developing exactly as the Romans expected. Their superior numbers begin to tell, pushing into the Carthaginian centre, forcing it backward. The Gallic and Iberian warriors, despite their ferocity, cannot withstand the sustained pressure of so many Roman swords. Step by step they give ground, and the forward bulge of Hannibal's crescent begins to flatten, then to bend backward. From the Roman perspective, this appears to be the beginning of victory. The Carthaginian line is breaking, being forced back by the relentless Roman advance. Varro, watching from his command position, likely feels a surge of satisfaction. The plan is working. The overwhelming numerical superiority is having its intended effect. But what the Romans cannot see cannot understand until it is far too late is that this retreat is not collapse, but choreography. Hannibal has instructed his centre to give ground, to draw the Romans deeper into the crescent, to make them believe that victory is within grasp if they only press harder, commit more troops to the centre, focus all their energy on breaking through what appears to be a failing Carthaginian line. And the Romans, believing they are winning, do exactly that. More and more units are fed into the centre, deepening the Roman formation at that point, creating a massive concentration of men, all pushing forward into the gradually inverting Carthaginian crescent. On the wings, meanwhile, a different story unfolds. The cavalry engagements, which began shortly after the main infantry clash, develop with startling speed. On the Roman right, the Numidian cavalry, light horsemen of extraordinary skill, engaged the Roman allied cavalry in a swirling, chaotic fight characterized more by harassment and feigned retreats than by direct charges. The Numidians excel at this type of combat, drawing their opponents out of position, frustrating them with hit-and-run tactics, never committing to a decisive engagement but never allowing the Roman cavalry to disengage and support the infantry. On the Roman left, the situation is more dramatic. Here, the heavier Iberian and Gallic cavalry under Hasdrubal, Hannibal's brother, face the Roman cavalry in a direct confrontation. The Carthaginian cavalry, better trained and more numerous, quickly gain the upper hand. The fight is fierce but brief. The Roman cavalry, overwhelmed and outmatched, break and flee the field, leaving the Roman infantry's left flank completely exposed. Hasdrubal does not pursue the fleeing Romans, however. Instead, showing remarkable discipline and adherence to Hannibal's plan, he wheels his cavalry around behind the Roman lines and leads them across the rear of the battlefield to attack the Numidians' opponents from behind. The Roman allied cavalry, now caught between the Numidians in front and Hasdrubal's heavy cavalry behind, quickly disintegrate as an effective fighting force. With both flanks of Roman cavalry driven from the field, Hannibal's horsemen now control the periphery of the battle entirely. But rather than celebrating this victory, they prepare for the next phase of the plan. The real killing has not yet begun. In the centre, the Roman infantry continues to push forward, the Carthaginian line now bent backward into a deep concave shape, almost a U formation. The Romans have advanced so far into this formation that they are now densely packed, unit pressed against unit, the men in the rear ranks pushing forward against those in front, everyone eager to reach the fighting, everyone believing that one more push will break the Carthaginian resistance entirely. The formation that Varro created, wide but shallow, has now become dangerously compressed, funneled into the narrowing space of Hannibal's trap. And then, with timing that speaks to the extraordinary control Hannibal maintains over his army, the African infantry on both flanks make their move. These units, which have held their positions throughout the cavalry battles and the infantry fighting, now pivot inward, wheeling to face the sides of the Roman mass. The Romans, so focused on pushing forward against the Carthaginian centre, suddenly find themselves under attack from their flanks. The African infantry, fresh and well-rested while the Romans are already tired from sustained combat, strike with devastating effectiveness. They are armed in Roman fashion, many wearing armour stripped from fallen Romans in previous battles, and they fight with the discipline of professional soldiers who know exactly what is expected of them. The crescent has become a trap. The trap is closing. The Romans, now being attacked from three sides, the Carthaginian centre, that has stopped retreating and begun fighting back more fiercely, and the African infantry striking from both flanks, begin to lose cohesion. Units cannot manoeuvre in the compressed space. Officers cannot effectively communicate with their men through the chaos and noise. The carefully drilled formations that make Roman infantry so effective begin to break down as men find themselves unable to maintain proper spacing, unable to rotate tired fighters out of the front line, unable to do anything except endure the assault from multiple directions. And then Hasdrubal's cavalry, having driven off all Roman mounted units, complete the encirclement. They attack the Roman rear, closing the final side of what has become a killing box. The 86,000 Romans are now completely surrounded by Hannibal's 50,000 Carthaginians. What seems mathematically impossible, a smaller force encircling a larger one, has been achieved through perfect tactical execution. The double envelopment, the most difficult maneuver in ancient warfare, has been successfully completed. What follows is not a battle but a slaughter, methodical and terrible. The Romans, packed so tightly that men cannot raise their arms to defend themselves, can neither fight effectively nor flee. The Carthaginians, attacking from all sides, work inward like a vice closing, compressing the Roman mass ever tighter. Men suffocate in the crush of bodies, dying without ever receiving a wound. Others are cut down as they stand helpless, unable to defend themselves in the press. The dust rises in choking clouds, mixing with the blood that now flows in streams across the plain. The noise is overwhelming. The screaming of wounded men, the clash of metal, the shouted commands that go unheeded in the chaos, the terrible sound of tens of thousands of men dying slowly over the course of hours. The psychological horror of the situation is perhaps worse than the physical danger. The Roman soldiers, who began the day confident in victory, who have been trained to believe in the invincibility of Roman arms, now understand that they are going to die. There is no escape, no hope of rescue, no possibility of fighting their way free. They can only wait for death to reach them, watching it work its way through the mass of bodies, coming slowly but inevitably closer. Some men break completely, surrendering to panic, trying desperately to burrow through their fellow soldiers towards some imaginary safety. Others maintain their discipline to the end, dying with their shields raised and their swords in hand, upholding the Roman military ideal even as the ideal itself collapses around them. Consul Paullus, who had argued for caution, who had warned against exactly this kind of confrontation, fights in the midst of his men. Wounded early in the battle, he continues to rally those around him, trying until the last moment to organise some kind of breakout or defensive position. He dies there on the plain, surrounded by the bodies of his soldiers, one more casualty in the incomprehensible carnage. With him fall dozens of senators, military tribunes, officers of every rank. The entire command structure of the Roman army is being systematically destroyed. The institutional knowledge, the experienced leadership that Rome has built over generations of warfare is bleeding out onto the dust of Cannae. The battle continues through the morning and into the afternoon, the Carthaginians never relenting, never offering quarter. By the standards of ancient warfare, this level of slaughter is extraordinary. Battles in this era typically ended when one side's formation broke and they fled the field, with relatively modest casualties inflicted during the fighting itself and higher losses during the pursuit. But at Cannae there is no pursuit because there is no flight. The Romans cannot flee because they are trapped, and so they die where they stand unit by unit as the Carthaginian vice inexorably tightens. By the time the sun begins its descent toward the western horizon, the killing is nearly complete. Of the 86,000 Romans who began the day expecting victory, somewhere between 50,000 and 70,000 lie dead on the field. The estimates vary because counting the dead after such carnage is impossible, but by any measure, it is one of the bloodiest single days in the history of warfare. The plain of Cannae has become a vast graveyard, the earth soaked with blood, the air thick with the smell of death. The few Romans who managed to escape, perhaps 10,000 in total, have fled in scattered groups, making their way toward the safety of nearby towns or back toward Roman territory. Thousands more have been captured and will face slavery or ransom negotiations. The Carthaginian army, exhausted from the day's work but victorious beyond any reasonable expectation, begins the grim task of collecting their own dead and wounded. Their casualties, while not trivial, perhaps 6,000 killed, are remarkably light given the scale of the engagement. It is the kind of lopsided casualty ratio that should be impossible in ancient warfare, yet Hannibal's tactical genius has made it reality. As evening falls over Cannae, silence descends on the battlefield. A silence made more profound by the fact that hours earlier, this space was filled with the noise of tens of thousands of men fighting and dying. Now there is only the occasional groan of the wounded, the crying of those searching for fallen comrades, the sounds of scavengers beginning their work. The river Aufidus flows on, indifferent to the human tragedy that has unfolded on its banks. The summer stars emerge in the darkening sky, their ancient light falling on a scene of devastation that defies comprehension. News of the disaster travels slowly northward toward Rome, carried by survivors who struggle into allied cities with tales of catastrophe that seem too terrible to be true. Initial reports are fragmentary, confused, impossible to verify. But as more survivors arrive, as the stories begin to align, a horrifying picture emerges. The largest army Rome ever assembled has been annihilated. 2 consuls led the army into battle, and only one survived, Varro, who managed to escape with a small group of cavalry. The casualty list reads like a roll call of Rome's elite families, Senators, former consuls, military tribunes, men of wealth and influence whose deaths leave gaps in the fabric of Roman society that will take generations to fill. When definitive confirmation reaches Rome, the city reacts with a mixture of grief and terror unlike anything in its history. The wailing of women mourning their dead fills the streets. Temples overflow with citizens seeking divine intervention or attempting to understand what sin Rome has committed to deserve such punishment. The Senate meets in emergency session, the surviving senators staring at the empty seats where their colleagues once sat, trying to comprehend the magnitude of the crisis. Rome itself is nearly defenseless now. The army is gone, and there is no significant force between Hannibal and the city itself. Logically, strategically, Rome should sue for peace, should acknowledge defeat and negotiate the best terms possible. But Rome does not surrender. In what may be its finest hour, even in the depths of catastrophe, Rome chooses defiance. The Senate refuses to acknowledge defeat, refuses to negotiate with Hannibal, refuses even to ransom the captured Roman soldiers, sending the message that Rome expects its soldiers to win or die, never to be taken prisoner. New legions are recruited with urgent speed, drawing on age groups normally exempt from military service, arming slaves and promising them freedom in return for military service, calling in every favour and treaty obligation from allied cities across Italy. The message is clear. Rome will fight on, no matter the cost, no matter how long it takes. The psychological dimension of Rome's response is as important as the military dimension. By refusing to acknowledge defeat, by continuing to resist despite the overwhelming catastrophe at Cannae, Rome maintains its moral authority with its allies and projects an image of indomitable will. Many of the Italian allied cities, watching Rome's reaction to Cannae, make a calculation. Even after such a defeat, Rome remains a more reliable long-term power than Hannibal and his foreign army. Some cities defect to Hannibal, certainly, particularly in southern Italy, where Carthaginian influence can be most directly applied. But the mass defection that Hannibal hoped would follow Cannae never materializes. Rome's allies, for the most part, remain loyal, and this loyalty will prove crucial in the long war that follows. Hannibal, for his part, faces a strategic dilemma in the wake of his greatest victory. His cavalry commander, Hannibal, reportedly urges him to march immediately on Rome, famously saying that in 5 days Hannibal could be dining on the Capitoline Hill. Hannibal refuses, and Hannibal allegedly responds with one of history's most pointed criticisms. "You know how to win a victory, Hannibal, but you do not know how to use one." The exchange may be apocryphal, but it captures a genuine strategic problem. Hannibal's army, while victorious, is not equipped for siege warfare. He has no siege engines, no supply train adequate for a prolonged investment of a fortified city, no reinforcements coming from Carthage. Rome itself, even defended by hastily raised levies, represents a formidable objective. Hannibal calculates that marching on Rome immediately after Cannae might trap him in a siege he cannot win, potentially destroying his army through attrition even in victory. So instead, Hannibal continues his strategy of moving through Italy, winning battles, encouraging defections, trying to unravel Rome's alliance system rather than confronting Roman power directly. It is a reasonable strategy given his limitations, but in retrospect it may represent a missed opportunity. Rome, in the immediate aftermath of Cannae, is as vulnerable as it will ever be. The psychological shock, the military weakness, the sheer terror of Hannibal's approach might have accomplished what force of arms could not, convincing Rome to negotiate. But Hannibal does not march on Rome, and Rome uses the breathing space to recover, to rebuild, to transform its approach to the war. The conflict drags on for more than a decade after Cannae, morphing into a war of attrition that gradually turns in Rome's favour. Rome learns from Cannae, adopting more cautious tactics, avoiding the kind of decisive battle that Hannibal excels at orchestrating. Roman commanders like Fabius Maximus perfect a strategy of shadowing Hannibal's army, harassing his foragers, cutting off his supplies, but never engaging in full battle where his tactical genius can be brought to bear. Meanwhile, Rome opens new fronts, attacking Carthaginian holdings in Spain and eventually invading North Africa itself, threatening Carthage directly. Hannibal, his strategic position in Italy becoming increasingly untenable, is eventually recalled to defend Carthage and is defeated by Scipio Africanus at the Battle of Zama in 202 BC. The Second Punic War ends with Carthaginian defeat and the establishment of Roman dominance in the Western Mediterranean. But Cannae itself transcends the immediate strategic situation. becoming something larger than a single battle or even a single war. It becomes a case study, a defining example of tactical excellence, a battle that military theorists and commanders will study for more than 2 millennia. The double envelopment that Hannibal executed so perfectly represents the ideal in military maneuver, using superior tactics and coordination to overcome numerical disadvantage, achieving total victory through position and timing rather than through attrition. Every military academy in the world teaches Cannae. It appears in the curricula at West Point and Sandhurst, at St. Cyr, and the Prussian Kriegsakademie. Officers learn to diagram the battle's phases, to understand the decisions Hannibal made and why they worked, to study what this ancient engagement reveals about warfare's fundamental principles. The German general staff in the 19th and early 20th centuries was particularly obsessed with Cannae, seeing in it the model for the quick, decisive victories they sought to achieve through their own doctrine of rapid manoeuvre and encirclement. The Schlieffen Plan, Germany's strategy for a two-front war, was explicitly designed to achieve a Cannae on a grand scale, encircling and destroying the French army in a single vast pincer movement. During World War II, the concept of blitzkrieg, rapid armoured thrusts that break through enemy lines and then wheel to encircle defending forces, is Cannae adapted to mechanised warfare. The great encirclement battles on the Eastern Front, where hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers were trapped and captured in vast pockets, consciously sought to replicate what Hannibal achieved with his ancient army. Even in modern military doctrine, with all its technological sophistication, the principles illustrated at Cannae remain relevant. The concept of manoeuvre warfare, the emphasis on striking enemy weaknesses rather than confronting strength directly, the value of surprise and psychological dislocation, the goal of destroying enemy cohesion rather than simply inflicting casualties, all of these ideas are present in Hannibal's victory over Rome. Military theorists from Clausewitz to Lidl-Hart to modern strategists have drawn lessons from Cannae, using it as a reference point for discussions of operational art and tactical excellence. The battle has also become a cautionary tale about overconfidence and the dangers of predictable tactics. The Romans at Cannae believed that their numerical superiority and traditional methods would be sufficient for victory. They walked into Hannibal's trap because they could not conceive that an enemy commander might deliberately weaken his centre, might plan for his line to retreat, might have anticipated their every move and prepared counters. The lesson, that success requires adaptation, that past methods may not work against an innovative enemy, that numerical advantage means nothing without tactical skill, resonates across military history. Beyond the military sphere, Cannae has entered the broader cultural imagination as a symbol of catastrophic defeat. The phrase Hannibal at the gates evokes existential threat, while Cannae itself has become shorthand for overwhelming disaster. Writers and historians invoke the battle when discussing moments of supreme crisis, using it as a touchstone for understanding how societies respond to catastrophic loss. The fact that Rome survived Cannae, that it ultimately prevailed in the war despite this devastating defeat, offers its own lessons about resilience, institutional strength, and the limits of tactical brilliance when confronting strategic determination. As centuries pass, the physical site of the battle transforms while its memory endures. The town of Cannae itself diminishes in importance, eventually becoming little more than a village, and then an archaeological site. The plain where so many thousands died returns to agricultural use, season after season, the soil enriched by ancient blood gradually dissipating into the earth. Farmers plough the fields, sometimes turning up artifacts, corroded weapons, fragments of armour, the occasional coin, but mostly the land bears no visible mark of its terrible history. Olive groves grow where legions fell, wheat waves in fields that once ran red with blood. The river Aufidus continues its patient journey to the sea, carving its channel deeper through the centuries, indifferent to the human drama that briefly played out on its banks. Yet even as the physical traces fade, the battle's significance grows. Each generation of military historians rediscovers Cannae, reinterprets it through contemporary frameworks, finds new relevance in its ancient patterns. The advent of computer simulation allows for detailed modelling of the battle's phases, testing alternative scenarios, exploring what might have happened if the Romans had deployed differently, or if Hannibal's timing had been less perfect. These digital reconstructions, for all their technological sophistication, consistently confirm what the ancient sources suggest, that Cannae represents near-perfect tactical execution, a convergence of planning, discipline, and battlefield awareness that is extraordinarily difficult to achieve. Modern visitors to the site of Cannae find a landscape that is at once ordinary and haunted. The archaeological park preserves the remains of the ancient town. A few walls, some mosaics, the layout of streets long abandoned. Interpretive signs explain the battle's progress, with diagrams showing troop positions and movement. But the real site of the fighting, the open plain where the armies clashed, is mostly just open countryside, peaceful and bucolic, giving no immediate indication of its historical significance. It requires an active imagination to populate this quiet space with the armies of Rome and Carthage, to hear the clash of arms and the cries of the dying, to understand that every square metre of this peaceful ground was once contested with desperate ferocity. There is something profound in this disconnect between past horror and present peace. The battle that dominated the consciousness of an entire civilization, that changed the course of history, that has been studied and analysed for more than 2 millennia, occurred on ground that is now unremarkable. Just another piece of the Italian countryside, where tourists occasionally visit, but where local life continues largely unconcerned with ancient events. The grass grows, the seasons turn, and the earth keeps its secrets. The bones of Romans and Carthaginians alike have long since dissolved into the soil, becoming part of the land they fought over, nourishing the crops that grow in fields where armies once collided. Yet memory persists, encoded not in the landscape but in the continuous tradition of military thought that connects the ancient world to our own. Every officer who studies tactics learns about Cannae. Every discussion of encirclement warfare references it. Every analysis of tactical genius mentions Hannibal's name. The battle has achieved a kind of immortality, not through physical monuments that decay and crumble, but through its continuing relevance to the human practice of organised warfare. As long as armies face each other in battle, as long as commanders seek to outwit their opponents through superior tactics and coordination, Cannae will remain a touchstone, a reference point, an ideal that has never been perfectly replicated but never stops inspiring attempts. The human dimension of the battle also echoes across the centuries. The stories of individuals, Consul Paullus dying among his men, Maharbal urging Hannibal to march on Rome, Varro escaping to rebuild the army, remind us that grand strategic movements and tactical maneuvers ultimately depend on human decisions, human courage, human failings. The 86,000 Romans who marched to Cannae were individuals, each with a name, a family, a life that ended on that dusty plain. The soldiers who survived carried memories of that day for the rest of their lives, traumatized by what they witnessed, haunted by the friends they lost, perhaps racked by survivors' guilt that they lived while so many perished. In Rome itself, the aftermath of Cannae was a period of intense mourning that exceeded even the public grief after earlier defeats. So many families lost members that the normal funeral customs had to be abbreviated. There simply weren't enough days to properly mourn all the dead. The economic impact was severe as well, with the loss of so many men of military age affecting agricultural production, trade, and every aspect of Roman society. The political consequences rippled through the Republic's institutions, forcing reforms in military recruitment, strategy, and command structure. The war continued for more than a decade after Cannae, a grinding struggle that transformed Rome from a regional Italian power into a Mediterranean empire. But the memory of that single day in August 216 BC remained a scar on the Roman psyche. For Carthage, Cannae represented both the high point and, in a sense, the beginning of the end. Hannibal achieved a victory so complete that it should have won the war, yet the war continued and eventually Carthage lost everything. The fact that Hannibal could win such a perfect tactical victory and yet fail to achieve strategic success raises profound questions about the relationship between battles and wars, between military genius and political objectives. Cannae did not save Carthage, did not prevent Rome's ultimate triumph, did not even fundamentally alter the trajectory of the Mediterranean world, which was already moving toward Roman domination. What it did do was create a moment of sublime tactical excellence, a demonstration of what is possible when a military art reaches its highest expression. A lesson that transcends the immediate strategic context and speaks to fundamental truths about conflict, coordination, and the application of force. As darkness falls once more over the plains of Apulia, just as it did on that August evening more than 2,000 years ago, the landscape settles into quietude. The modern world intrudes only gently here, a distant highway, the lights of small towns on the horizon, the occasional airplane passing overhead. but the essential character of the place remains, the sweep of open land under vast Italian sky, the river winding through its ancient course, the quality of light and air that has changed little across the millennia. It is possible in the fading light to feel a connection to that distant past, to sense the presence of all those who walked this ground before, who fought and died here, whose decisions and actions continue to resonate through history. The story of Cannae is not ultimately about glory or triumph, though Hannibal's tactics were glorious and his victory was complete. It is not about the superiority of one civilization over another, though Rome and Carthage each brought their own values and methods to the conflict. Rather, it is a story about the extremes of human experience, the heights of tactical genius and the depths of catastrophic defeat, the resilience of societies facing existential threat and the fragility of even the largest armies when confronted with superior strategy. It is a reminder that history turns on moments of decision, on days when the actions of a few thousand people on a small patch of ground determine the course of events for centuries to come. And so the battle lives on, not as ruins or monuments, but as knowledge passed down through generations of soldiers and scholars, as case studies in military academies, as examples in textbooks, as references in strategy documents. The names of the participants, Hannibal, Varro, Paullus, remain known while countless other ancient figures have been forgotten. The date, August 2nd, 216 BC, is remembered when innumerable other dates have vanished from record. The place, Cannae, retains significance when thousands of ancient towns and cities survive only as archaeological footnotes. This is the true monument to what happened here, this persistence of memory across more than 2 millennia, this continued relevance to how we think about conflict and strategy and the possibilities inherent in tactical excellence. The wind that moves across these fields tonight carries no memory of ancient screams, no echo of clashing armies. The earth beneath these grasses bears no visible scar from the blood that soaked into it so long ago. The river flows as it has always flowed, patient and eternal, marking the seasons by its floods and droughts, indifferent to the brief human violence that occasionally erupts along its banks. Yet the story persists, told and retold, analysed and reinterpreted, finding new meaning in each era that studies it. Cannae endures not as a place but as an idea, a moment when tactics and strategy aligned perfectly, when human skill and planning achieved results that seemed impossible, when one day's events created lessons that would outlast empires. As we withdraw from this ancient battlefield, pulling back from the intimate details of tactics and terrain to the broader sweep of history, we carry with us the essential paradox that Cannae represents. It was Rome's greatest defeat, yet also a step in Rome's path to ultimate victory. It was Hannibal's most brilliant triumph, yet also insufficient to achieve his strategic goals. It was a day of unspeakable horror that nonetheless produced lessons of enduring value. From the right distance, with the perspective of centuries, we can see Cannae as what it truly is, a moment of crystalline clarity in the fog of war, a perfect example of tactical excellence, a reminder that success in war requires not just courage and strength, but also intelligence, flexibility, and the ability to see beyond the obvious. The stars that shine over Apulia tonight are the same stars that look down on the armies of Rome and Carthage, the same patterns that guided ancient navigators and marked ancient seasons. Under their unchanging light, the wheel of history continues its rotation, bringing new conflicts and new commanders, new strategies and new technologies, but also returning again and again to fundamental truths about human nature, about power and its application, about the eternal tension between force and craft. And when military thinkers of future generations seek to understand these truths, they will turn once more to the plains of Cannae, to the story of 2 armies that met on a summer day in 216 BC, to the lessons inscribed in blood on dusty Italian ground that have never been surpassed and perhaps never will be. The quiet that settles over the battlefield now is complete, the kind of peaceful silence that comes only after all voices have been stilled, all questions answered, all stories told. It is a silence that invites rest, that encourages the mind to settle and reflect, that provides space for understanding to deepen without the pressure of immediate events. In this silence, the past and present merge, the ancient and modern world touch briefly, and we can hear across the centuries the essential message of Cannae, that human endeavour, in all its terrible glory and tragic waste, continues to teach us about ourselves, about our capabilities and our limitations, about the thin line between genius and catastrophe that commanders walk and soldiers endure, The battle is over, the armies long dispersed, the urgent questions of that day resolved by time and distance. What remains is memory and lesson, and the eternal human struggle to understand what happened here, and what it means for all the days that followed, and all the conflicts yet to come.